Hello, my dear friends. As human beings, we attempt to achieve stability in our lives. We seek stability with respect to our health. We exercise, at least we try to. We try to diet and eat healthy foods. We make a very strong effort to have financial security and stability. Alas, it is not always possible, and it is sometimes elusive. In particular, there are times when our sense of security is rattled and even shattered. Such was the case when COVID hit 3 or 4 years ago, and millions of people were dying, and it wasn't safe to go outside without a mask. And that taught us that we are not the masters of our own destiny. But then COVID seemed to subside, and then it appeared as if we were returning back to a state of normality. But then, out of the clear blue, on October 7th, again, our lives and our worlds were turned upside down. A massacre of unbelievable proportions, kidnapping of hostages, and the hostages are, after 12 weeks, the trauma is enormous. The hostages, 150, are still in captivity. The war in Gaza rages on. Israel fighting in the narrow streets of Gaza and in the winding buildings and in the tunnels to try to overcome Hamas with great difficulty. And every day there are sacrifices, korbanos, soldiers who giving up their lives for this state of Israel. And then there's the anti-Semitism, which took us by surprise. We knew that there was some anti-Semitism, but not to the extent. The day of the massacre, October 7th, there were people around the world who were demonstrating in favor of Hamas. Couldn't believe it. In favor of Hamas, perhaps the worst terrorist organization that there is today. You would think that any normal person would recognize the horrors of what they did, but there were not only there were anti-Semites that would not recognize it, but they celebrated what took place, and they talked about with words that context that distorted the reality of what took place. And even in our own country, where we thought that we were relatively secure, we discovered that's not the case. And every day there's demonstrations and pro-Hamas, and even in the hallowed halls of Ivy League universities, lo and behold, there's tremendous anti-Semitism, and Jewish students are extremely insecure at the present time. So our world has been turned upside down, and where in the past we thought that we had some measure of stability and security here in America, it turns out that we are now living with instability, insecurity, fear, and trepidation, uncertain of what the future holds in store for us. And there's a basic fallacy that people live with, and that causes when things happen that are unsettling, our sense of insecurity is accentuated. And that fallacy is that we believe that we are the masters of our own destiny. And when we lose control, then we're shattered, because we thought that we had some control over our own destiny. But that, in fact, was never the case. It's just that things were functioning on their own, but actually they weren't on their own. But the Rebbeinu Shalom was running the world, and it had the appearance as if we were the masters of our own destiny. But that was never the case. There's a fantastic medrash in Parashas Vayichi. The Chumash has been describing the tumultuous story of Yosef and his brothers, and they for a long period of time, Yosef and Yaakov and the brothers lived with a great deal of fear and trepidation and anxiety, each one in their own way. And the Medrash says that when Yehuda sought to find a wife, so the pasuk says, "Vahi be'esahu." It was at that time that Yehuda went to seek a wife. So the Medrash comments, what does it mean at that time? So the Medrash says, here's what was happening at that time. There were 4 parties or 4 people that were fasting and wearing sackcloths because of the unsettling events of their lives. Yaakov, because he thought that his son Yosef, his dear son, was murdered by a wild animal. There was Yosef, who was imprisoned in an Egyptian, it wasn't even a cell, it was a pit. And for 12 years, Yosef languished in prison, thinking that after having been kidnapped and hijacked by his brothers, of all people, he thought he will never be able to escape from that sentence for the rest of his life. And he was fasting and wearing a sackcloth. There was Reuven, who tried to save Yosef. He prevented the brothers from killing Yosef, but he wasn't successful in stopping them from selling Yosef, and therefore he was distraught. And there was Yehuda, who was to blame for the sale. And then afterwards he saw the pain that Yaakov was experiencing. So they were all wearing, the Medrash says they were asuk. They were engaged, involved, Basako V'tani, so they were completely absorbed in the trauma, their own trauma of what had transpired in their lives. So the Medrash says that it was at that moment when all this turmoil was taking place and it was so unsettling for so many people, it was at that moment that Yehuda haya asuk likach lo isha. Yehuda was engaged in finding a wife, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu haya osek haya osek. Rebbeinu Shem was also engaged. What was God doing? Borei Orosh HaMelech HaMashiach. God was creating the light of Mashiach, because Yehuda was going to marry a wife, and he gave birth to 2 sons. His sons, Erev Onan, they married Tamar. They died. They were punished for their sins, and then eventually Tamar and seduced Yehuda, and Tamar gave birth to 2 sons, and one of them was Peretz. And from Peretz emerged the dynasty of David HaMelech, and ultimately the Melech HaMashiach. So God, while all this turmoil and uncertainty and instability was taking place, God was busy with the light of Mashiach. So what is the Medrash trying to say? The Medrash is saying is that when we look at reality, we only see the external. We don't see what's really going on behind the scenes, because God is maneuvering the world, and he's moving it in a certain direction, and we have no idea. The whole episode of Yosef and his brothers was, as it unfolded over a period of 22 years, it was all shrouded and clouded in mystery. The brothers didn't know that Yosef became the king of Mitzrayim, the ruler of Mitzrayim. They thought that Yosef was a terrible person, that his dreams were delusions of grandeur, and that he wanted to destroy them, and therefore they sold him into slavery. And Yosef thought that his situation was hopeless. He was betrayed by his family, and Yaakov thought that Yosef had perished. And then Yosef, when the brothers finally came to Mitzrayim, and Yosef arranged that they would bring Binyamin, and then he put the gvia, the shallot in the goblet, not the shallot, the goblet in the sack of Binyamin, and Binyamin was taken prisoner. And again, their world was turned upside down, topsy-turvy, and they thought that if Binyamin would not be able to, they could not bring Binyamin back home to Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov would die. He lost Yosef. Now he's going to lose Binyamin. It would be too much for him, and the world was black. And then all of a sudden, out of no place, Yosef reveals himself. Ani Yosef. And it was such a startling revelation. And the brothers could not believe that this was Yosef, the person that they thought was a horrible individual. He was the savior of Klal Yisrael, and he was going to protect them during the famine. And they saw that his dreams were not delusions, but the dreams were prophecies. So they were living with a false sense of reality for years and years. And then suddenly in one moment, everything was transformed. And even Yosef when Yaakov passed away and the brothers came back from burying Yaakov in Eretz Yisrael, and they thought that Yosef was angry at them and take revenge. And Yosef says, "Am I in place of God?" But Yosef assures them. He says, "You thought you atem chashaftem alai ra. You thought that you were doing evil to me, but the reality is that God was doing tremendous chesed, because if not for my being in my position in Mitzrayim, we would have all perished in the famine." So the reality is changing so quickly. So, but who's moving everything? How does all this happen? It's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has His plan of where the world should go, where human history should be, and at any given point during the episode, if you had to figure out like what's happening next and where is it headed and what's God's intention, nobody in the world could have imagined and predicted the future. And the end result was that the Jews stayed in Mitzrayim for hundreds of years, and they became slaves. And then they left Mitzrayim miraculously, and it was Har Sinai. And then they came to Eretz Yisrael, and they built the Beis Hamikdash. All of Jewish history began with this episode of Yosef. It began with Avraham Yitzchak, but the extended history with what was going to happen with Klal Yisrael. This was all unfolding at this time. Everybody was asuk in his different asuk, engaged, as the Medrash says, in their different way. And God had His master plan, and His master plan was to bring the light of Mashiach. When was that plan going to be realized? It's 3,000 years since Yehuda took a wife, married, and eventually had a son, Peretz, 3,000 years ago, and it's all leading up to the Or Mashiach. We still haven't been zocheh to the Or Mashiach. It will come, but you see that God's master plan is not a few years. God's master plan is thousands of years, and God is moving history in such powerful ways, and things change overnight. The whole world turns upside down, and things are different. But human beings, we are absorbed in our own small world, in our own, we call Dalet Amos, in our own four cubicle, 4 feet in a cubicle, so to speak. But in the meantime, the Ribbon Shalom is moving history in a direction that He wants. And the sense of insecurity that we have is because we don't realize that God is the one that's moving human history, and God determines our destiny. We don't determine it, and God has a plan. And if a person lives with that sense, then even though there are difficult times, the David Amel says, the David Hashem Arav Yishi Mimi Rai, God is my life. I'm not afraid. When I'm attacked with Zosani, when the enemies try to kill me at a time of war, I have bitachon. He has bitachon emunah in the Ribbon Shalom. In the davening every day is a very powerful set of psukim in Yehi Chavod. It says, Hashem Heifir Atzas Gayim. God annuls the design, the plans of the nations of the world. The nations of the world, they have their own plan. They want history to move in their direction, and God annuls it. And Rabbos Machshavos B'Levish V'Atzas Hashem Hisakum. There are many thoughts in the heart of man. Everybody has a plan. What we want, how we want to live our lives, how we want to achieve security and stability. But the end is Atzas Hashem Hisakum. The plan of the Ribbon Shalom is what is going to stand. Atzas Hashem La'olam Tamod. The plan of God is forever. It will ever be standing. For generations to generations, the plan of God is going to be implemented. And we are, in the end, we are not masters of our destiny. We are bystanders. But if we connect ourselves to the Ribbon Shalom, and we live our lives with a sense of emunah and bitachon and trust and faith in Ribbon Shalom, there are difficult times, and there are painful times, and we should feel the pain and the suffering of Klal Yisrael. But at the same time, if a person knows that we are not, it's not hefker. The world is not just spiraling out of control and everything's going helter-skelter. And there's all these tremendous forces of evil that are moving things in different directions. Ultimately, the one that's behind the scenes and moving everything is the Ribono Shel Olam. And he has a master plan. We don't know what it is, and we don't understand, and we could ask all sorts of questions and kashas, but it's questions based on not understanding and not knowing what God's plan is. And if we will ingrain this in our minds, and I just have to say that to remember this pasuk that Yosef said, it's so important. Atem chashaftem alai garab, Elokim chashav tova. We don't know what is good and what is bad in life. So things happen, we think it's terrible. Yosef told his brothers, you thought selling me was terrible, was bad, it was horrible. But the Ribono Shel Olam, it was just the opposite. The Ribono Shel Olam decided that it should be for the good. The Ribono Shel Olam wanted that to happen for the benefit, because otherwise the famine would have overtaken Egypt and Eretz Yisrael, and everybody would have perished. And when things happen that are difficult, we have to remember that pasuk. Atem chashaftem alai gara. You thought it was for evil, but the Ribono Shel Olam thought it was for good. And that so many things happen in our lives which we think that it's terrible, it's bad. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. But in the broadest sense, we need to remember that everything that transpires, nothing happens by accident, nothing happens on its own. Behind the scenes, the Ribono Shel Olam is moving history in the direction that he wants. And if we live with Amunah and Bitachon, then even when things are difficult and hard, we could still have a sense of security and stability and live our lives in a happy and productive manner.